I wasn't supposed to find out that way. Not at a table, not in front of everyone, and definitely not by accident. But maybe that's why it hurt differently. Because nobody planned to tell me. They just assumed I wouldn't know. I remember the dinner clearly. Same house, same long table, same fake smiles people use when they already made a decision without you. My mother was talking loudly, my father sat beside her quietly, and my cousin Daniel, he looked comfortable. Too comfortable, like he belonged there more than I did. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. Just normal conversation, family stories, random laughter. Then my mother said something that changed everything. Well, Daniel deserves stability after everything he's been through. I looked up. Nobody reacted, like that sentence already made sense to everyone else. My father nodded slowly. We're doing what's best for the family. That word. Family. Funny how people use it, right before betraying you. I stayed quiet, listened, watched, because something felt wrong. Not clearly, not fully, just enough. Then Daniel smiled slightly and said, I still can't believe the house will finally be mine. Silence. Not from them, from me. Because for a second, I genuinely thought I heard him wrong. The house? I asked. My mother looked at me casually. Yes, your father and I decided to transfer the inheritance. Transfer. Such a clean word. Soft, professional, almost harmless. Like they weren't talking about my future. My grandfather's house, the one I grew up in, the one I spent years helping maintain while everyone else disappeared. I looked at my father, waiting. Because surely he'd say something, explain, correct it. But he didn't. He just avoided my eyes, and that told me everything. We thought it was the right decision, my mother added. Right decision? For who? Because nobody asked me. Nobody warned me. Nobody even respected me enough to tell me privately. Daniel shifted awkwardly, but not enough to stop smiling. That part mattered, because guilt looks different. And he didn't look guilty. He looked lucky. I remember sitting there, hearing them discuss my inheritance like I was a guest in the conversation, like I had no connection to it, no claim, no history, nothing. You already have your apartment, my mother continued, as if that changes anything. I replied quietly. She sighed immediately, like I was becoming difficult, like I was ruining the mood. We're not doing this tonight. That line. Classic. People love delaying conversations when they know they're wrong. I nodded slowly, because suddenly I wasn't emotional anymore. Just aware. Aware of how long this had probably been planned. How many conversations happened without me. How many decisions were made behind closed doors. And that realization, it changed something inside me. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. The secretive phone calls, the sudden meetings, the way my mother stopped mentioning legal paperwork around me. At the time, I ignored it, because I trusted them. That was my mistake. Trust makes you blind to obvious things, until the truth forces your eyes open. Dinner ended awkwardly. Nobody really looked at me, not properly. Because once betrayal becomes visible, people stop making eye contact. I stood up quietly, grabbed my coat. Then my mother said, "Don't overreact." I almost laughed, because betrayal always sounds smaller when the people hurting you describe it. I'm not overreacting, I replied calmly. I'm just paying attention now. That made the room silent, real silent, because deep down, they knew. They knew this wasn't small. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that night, for the first time, I stopped seeing them as family and started seeing them clearly.
That night, I didn't go home immediately. I drove around for almost an hour, not because I was emotional, not because I needed space, just because I was thinking, clearly, carefully, because something about that dinner didn't fully make sense. Not emotionally, legally. The confidence in my mother's voice, the way Daniel already talked about the house like it belonged to him, the way my father stayed silent. It all sounded finalised. Too finalised. And that bothered me, because there was one important detail they clearly forgot. My grandfather never trusted quick decisions, especially family ones. He planned everything carefully, quietly, precisely. And suddenly I remembered something. A conversation from years ago, small at the time, forgettable almost. We had been sitting on the back porch together, just the two of us, and he said, "Never assume people will do the right thing after I'm gone." At the time I laughed, thought he was being dramatic. But now, those words sounded different, sharper, more intentional. The next morning I went straight to his old lawyer's office, not because I expected anything huge, just because I needed clarity, real clarity, not family explanations, not emotional manipulation. Facts. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Your grandfather spoke about you often," she said softly. That stayed with me, because suddenly I realized something important. My grandfather prepared for people long before they disappointed him. A few minutes later, the lawyer walked in carrying a thin folder. Small, simple. But somehow, it felt heavier than anything I'd held in years. He sat down calmly, then asked, "So, they finally told you?" That sentence alone changed everything, because it meant he already knew what my parents were trying to do, knew the conflict was coming. And judging by his expression, he wasn't surprised. "They're transferring the house to my cousin," I said carefully. The lawyer looked at me for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "No," he replied calmly. "They're trying to." Trying, not succeeding. That word mattered. A lot. I frowned slightly. "I don't understand." He opened the folder slowly, carefully, then slid a document across the desk. And that's when everything changed. Not emotionally, completely. Because right there, in clear legal writing, was my name. Not as beneficiary, not as future owner, current owner. The house had already been transferred years ago. Quietly, privately, legally. To me. I stared at the paper, not reacting immediately, because sometimes shock doesn't feel loud. It feels silent, like your brain pauses before reality catches up. "They don't know?" I asked finally. The lawyer adjusted his glasses slightly. "Your grandfather instructed me not to disclose it unless necessary." Necessary. I almost smiled,
because apparently that moment had arrived. "He predicted this?" I asked quietly. The lawyer didn't hesitate. "Yes." Simple, direct, like it wasn't even surprising. And honestly, that hurt more than the betrayal itself, because it meant my grandfather understood them better than I did. He saw something years earlier that I refused to see. Greed, favoritism, entitlement. And he protected me from it quietly, without ever making a scene. Looking back now, I realize something important. Real protection isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits silently until the exact moment you need it. And that folder, that was protection. The lawyer leaned back slightly. "Legally," he continued, "they cannot transfer something they do not own." That sentence felt incredible. Not because of revenge, not because of power, but because for the first time since that dinner, I understood something clearly. They thought I was powerless. That's why they acted so confidently. That's why they discussed my inheritance in front of me like I was irrelevant. Because they assumed I had nothing. And people become very careless when they think you can't stop them. I left the office calmly. No dramatic reaction, no emotional breakdown. Just clarity. Pure clarity. And clarity changes how you walk into a room. 3 days later, my parents invited everyone back to the house, apparently to celebrate. That part almost made me laugh. Celebrate what? Stealing from me successfully. Daniel was there early, smiling again, comfortable again. My mother greeted guests proudly like she had accomplished something noble. And my father, still quiet, still avoiding eye contact. Some things never change. I walked in calmly. No anger, no visible frustration. And honestly, that unsettled them more. Because guilty people expect emotion. They prepare for shouting, arguments, scenes. But calmness scares people when they know they're wrong. "You came," my mother said carefully. I nodded. "Of course." Daniel raised a glass slightly. "To new beginnings." That line, that stupid line. I almost felt bad for him. Almost.